Chapter 3 Voids and Besties. Back at his parents' house, Ted spent his time drawing cartoons and writing funny articles. He sent them to everyone he could think of: magazines in New York, college friends, advertising agencies. But no one except Helen seemed to be interested in flying cows and dancing dogs. Then a famous magazine, the Saturday Evening Post, accepted a cartoon. Ted had drawn two elegant tourists with parasols. They were sitting on tame camels and imagining that they were brave explorers. He signed it simply Seuss. The Post paid him $25. Even in 1927, that wasn't a lot of money, but it would pay for a month's rent. Ted decided it was enough to show he could earn a living as an illustrator. He moved to New York City, but until he had a steady income, he still couldn't marry Helen. Instead, Ted shared an apartment with a friend from Dartmouth. It was cheap and dirty. Every night before they went to bed, they had to take canes and whack away the rats. Ted's roommate knew someone who worked for a humor magazine called Judge. He introduced Ted, and the magazine offered him a job. He would be a writer and artist and earn a salary. Now he and Helen could marry. They had to change the date of their wedding once because Ted's sister, Marnie, was about to give birth. Ted wanted his whole family to be able to come to his wedding. Ted's niece, Peggy, was born on November 1st, 1927. On November 29th, Ted and Helen were married in their parents' parlor. Ted became very popular at Judge. He started writing a column called Voids and Besties, where he could introduce all his strange, playful characters. He signed the column Dr. Seuss. He added the doctor because he had disappointed his father by dropping out of Oxford. Unfortunately, Judge magazine was having money troubles. They didn't always have enough cash to pay their staff. Companies paid for ads in Judge with samples of their products instead of money. These samples got passed on to staff as their salaries. Often, Ted was paid in cases of shaving cream or soda. Once he received 1,872 nail clippers. That wasn't much help in paying the costs of everyday life. Then, in 1928, he had a stroke of luck. It started with flit, a popular bug killer. Before air conditioning, people had to leave their windows open in the summer to let in cool breezes. Houses became full of bugs. Ted started thinking about how awful summer must have been for the knights of old. It was bad enough having bugs inside. What if dragons could fly in and bite you? He drew a cartoon showing a knight in armor who couldn't get to sleep because there is a dragon in his room. The caption says, "Darn it all, another dragon," and just after I had sprayed the whole castle with flit. The wife of an advertising executive for Flit was at a beauty salon when she happened to see the cartoon in a magazine. She loved it so much, she made her husband Ted to do all the Flit ads. Ted drew people in funny situations being attacked by huge bugs. This became one of the most successful advertising campaigns in history. Today, few people remember the tagline Ted invented, "Quick, Henry, the Flit." But from the late 20s to the 50s, everyone knew it. Comedians quoted it, and it appeared in popular songs. Sales of Flit shot way up, and Dr. Seuss's drawings became famous. Flit hired Ted at a salary of $12,000 a year, a lot of money at the time. The next year, the stock market crashed, and America plunged into the Great Depression. All over the country, people were out of work, poor and starving. But thanks to Flit, Ted had plenty of money. With his new wealth, he and Helen began throwing parties. They had a very active social life, and Ted became famous in their circle of friends for his practical jokes. Once, he sneaked into the kitchen and put a huge plastic pearl in one of the oysters that was going to be served at dinner. Another time, he filled a friend's bathtub with Jell-O and goldfish. In 1931, Ted's mother died at the age of 52. Her early death was a shock to Ted, but at least she had lived long enough to see his first big success. Flint made Ted financially secure for life, but there was one problem. He didn't want to spend all his time drawing Flint ads, but his contract wouldn't let him do most other kinds of work. Years later, he wrote, "I would like to say I went into children's bookwork because of my great understanding of children. But it wasn't really true. Actually, illustrating children's books was one of the few things his contract let him do. New York apartments. The Geisels' first apartment in Manhattan was right across the street from a horse stable. Soon, they moved to a better apartment. Their new phone number was only one digit different from a nearby fish store. They often got telephone calls from people who wanted to buy fish. Instead of telling them they had the wrong number, Ted would draw a picture of the fish they had ordered and deliver it. Not everyone was amused at the time, but just think what those drawings would be worth today. Chapter 4. What I Saw on Mulberry Street. An editor at Viking Books saw the Flit advertisements and hired Ted to illustrate a book of mistakes made by school children. So Ted found himself drawing pictures of silly quotations like Benjamin Franklin produced electricity by rubbing cats backwards. The book was published in 1931. To Ted's surprise, it became a big hit, and Viking signed him up to do a sequel. Ted soon realized he'd make more money if he wrote and illustrated his own books. He began looking for the perfect subject for his first book. In 1936, Ted and Helen took a trip to Europe. On the ship ride home, he scribbled picture book ideas in his notebook. Ideas like a stupid horse and wagon and flying cat pulling Viking ship. Nothing seemed quite right. Meanwhile, the throbbing noise of the ship's engines were driving him crazy. He started fitting words to it. Suddenly, he found himself chanting, "And that is a story that no one can beat. And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street." And there was a story. A little boy walking home on Mulberry Street, a main street in Ted's hometown, looks for something interesting to tell his father about. All he can see is a plain horse and wagon, but by the time he reaches his house, he had turned the horse and wagon into a whole circus parade with blue elephants and a brass band. All the rhymes in Dr. Seuss's books bounced along, so naturally that people think they must have been easy to write, but Ted worked hard. "I know my stuff looks like it was all rattled off in 28 seconds, he complained, but every word is a struggle. For one picture book, he might write and tear up 500 or even 1,000 pages. Finally, Ted was happy with "And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street." He started sending it to publishers. They all rejected it. Most editors found it just too different. They thought the verse was rough and silly. Worst of all, it didn't have a moral. It wouldn't help make children behave better. "What's wrong with kids having fun reading without being preached at?" Ted yelled. Ted was about to give up when he ran into another Dartmouth friend. Marshall McClintock had just that day become the children's book editor of Vanguard Press. Vanguard often published books that were different. They were delighted with the book and immediately said yes. Ted was so grateful he named the hero in the book Marco after McClintock's son.